for having me. It's a great opportunity to reflect on the last 10 years or so. I'm going to present you in 6 parts the concepts and definitions that I'll be talking about, the challenges in implementing parsimonious land use, the foundation of why I did this research that I'm talking about, then the findings on 10-minute neighborhoods, science communication and public discourse on how to get it out, but then also spin-off and applied innovation on how to get it to the grounds and happening, and then finishing up with key takeaways and discussion. Yeah, when we look at Geneva, in 60 minutes from Rue de Danse, which is the densest housing neighborhood in Geneva, or actually even in Switzerland, you can see that you can reach almost the whole canton of Geneva if you walk for 60 minutes. 60 minutes is a time measure that people use to travel a day on average. So it comes pretty close to that. When we look at a 15-minute city by bike, yeah, you can also reach a big part of the canton of Geneva, not just the city of Geneva, and by car. The shed is almost the same size, but slightly different. In the south, you can see through the highway, you can reach more, but you can reach less towards the north. And then by public transport, the shed starts decreasing, because at this location, you only have a tram connection and bus, and not a fast speed connection. Yeah, 15 minutes on foot, it shrinks a bit more, and 10 minutes by foot, it gets the smallest. So it's a 10-minute neighborhood. I'll get to it later. And downtown Geneva, that's the shed that you have in 10 minutes walking, but it is not a 10-minute neighborhood. When we look at the more rural city or municipality of La Ville, it's in the canton of St. Gallen in the east of Switzerland. You can also see here a 60-minute walk on foot. You can almost get to the neighboring villages of Uzwil and Gossau. But you can see now by car you can get much further. So you can almost get to Herisau in 15 minutes drive by car. Whereas by bike, you can cover almost the entire city. So it is kind of a 15-minute city by bike. It's not a 15 minutes by city by public transportation, because it doesn't reach the whole city. And it's not a 15-minute city on foot. I'll show you more about this later. And it's not a 10-minute neighborhood. So people like convenience, and they walk to places, daily needs and public transportation. If they know it only takes 10 minutes. If it takes more than 10 minutes, even if they could be using the bike, as we have seen, there's a much bigger reach, and especially with an e-bike, the reach becomes almost the car-like. They often use the car, and this is kind of part of the problem, or that's kind of the finding that the Welt am Sonntag found recently, that you can theoretically reach many things by bike, but practically it's done very often by car. So what's the difference kind of between 15 minutes neighborhood and 15-minute city? I have not really found any quantification on the 15-minute city. The only thing Carlos Moreno once mentioned in a talk is that the 15-minute by bike is one of the measurements. So I use that as a measurement. If you have one or multiple 10-minute neighborhoods in a municipality or a city, you are automatically a 15-minute city. But you can be a 15-minute city, as we've seen on me showing earlier, by bike particularly. But you might be using the car instead, but it doesn't automatically offer walkable 10-minute neighborhoods. And why is that? Maybe for more distinction, the focus on the 15-minute city is livability, to enhance quality of life through cycling and infrastructure and urban greening. It's a vision versus reality. It's not, there is places that have actually 10-minute neighborhoods that can be 15-minute cities and are very walkable and can be walked, but many locations do have car dependency or or convenience are more convenient because they're low density and the distance between things are rather far. Therefore, it has some, in my perspective, has conceptual limits because it lacks measurability. What is density? What is a mix? And therefore, how can you measure what you have, but also how can you guide towards something that you would want to have, and therefore have an impact on the spatial and settlement structures that you have. 10-minute neighborhoods are measurable, integratable, and impactful. The idea is to have 10 minutes within 10 minutes of walking that you can reach housing, education, and services and public transport, maybe even the job, but maybe just the public transport to get to the job that is farther away. You can measure it. It's a 500-meter radius as an approximation for 10 minutes of walking. You have density benchmarks for residential and jobs, and also a ratio of how the mix of housing and jobs should be. And the idea is to have a spatial impact, to change the current settlement structure, to reduce the car dependence, or to support car independence, or to have more people walking. And why is that? Because in Switzerland, a bit more than 10 years ago, there was a vote, and parsimonious land use is one of the Spatial Planning Act, a central paragraph. And yeah, nearly 2/3 of the Swiss population voted in favor of having inner development first, meaning that where already settlement is, that you would develop this instead of growing out to add more zoning to green fields. And what we see now very clearly, this 10 years down the lane, is that we do still have an implementation gap, and that we have not grown out anymore as we used to, but we're not really grown up yet. We don't have the planning, the guidance to where to grow more compact. So the 10-minute neighborhood can be used as an actionable framework to do so. As I've mentioned, the legal mandates of the parsimonious land use in Article 1 of the Federal Spatial Planning Act. In there also, the planning instruments to do are cantonal structure plans on a municipality binding level, but then zoning plans for parcel specific and binding to landowners. And with this 500-meter radius of the 10-minute neighborhoods, you have a measurable unit where you can A, measure what's there, and B, also guide for where it could be going at suitable locations. So what are the challenges in implementing parsimonious land use? Well, we can name three. There's a weak federal direction with the Raumkonzept Schweiz. The cantonal plans lack implementation power. The icon is a bit of fog. If you, as a municipality, try to follow, it lacks local implementation teeth. But what's the most crucial in terms of what can be built is outdated zoning maps and bylaws. Some are 20, 30 years old, although they would have to be revised every 15 years. But those that are revised often are insufficiently revised. So just to have a glimpse on what these plans are, this is the Raumkonzept Schweiz. It's currently under revision. It has some nice colors and circles and lines. When we zoom into the Greater Zurich area and then go to the structural plan, we again have very colorful PDFs that we can try to find what we're supposed to be doing. When we zoom into the city of Zurich now, we have a brownish versus green. And when then we go to the zoning map, we have a colorful map of different uses that were supposed to mix or separate. And when we zoom into Zurich Nord, Thurgauer Straße, we have the Gestaltungsplan as a special land use plan, which has been an instrument for about 20 years in trying to densify, but coming with a lot of uncertainty or legal uncertainties, and is now oftentimes also abolished, falling back to the zoning that is a bit outdated. So what's happening is that zoning separates, it concentrates unevenly, but it also spreads out. We have an imbalance of homes and jobs. Central locations have very many jobs, and then sprawled out we have the housing. And this has led to two things: that the car is still being a significant mode of transport, and also that we suffer a housing crisis more and more, not only in cities where it has been for quite a while, but also in peripheral locations, because the production of housing cannot follow the demand, which is mostly driven by economy, which then is followed by housing. We would have the tools. I developed one with my PhD thesis that I finished 5 years ago. And there's also other tools. They oftentimes for planning remain unused by tools. I mean, GIS tools, geographical information tools, where there's multi-scale, multi-information possibilities. So what we have in our plans are creating are insufficient in the sense of where they allow what, but also in terms of even being able to build what's there, because there's weighing of interest that have not been done properly. And oftentimes the structural plans that are nowadays also done by municipalities on the right-hand side, are nice plans on a paper, but they remain theoretically, because they're not being transferred into the zoning plans and bylaws. So I come now to the 10-minute neighborhoods, which is part of the title and part of my research findings of a Swiss National Science Foundation at the ETH Wohnforum, together with the University of Basel. 10-minute neighborhoods, the idea is that I've mentioned already, within 10 minutes of walking, that you could reach many errands: the bakery, the post office, the school, but also public transportation. And this requires a certain level of compactness. I found that at least 10,000 residents and 5,000 jobs, ideally at the ratio of 2 to 1, because on the one hand, in Switzerland, only half of the people are working. The others are too old, too young, studying, or not working, or just partially working. But also a location that has both residents and jobs can sustain the demand for gastronomic uses. The job people have lunch there, the people living there have dinner at the restaurant, etc. So the most efficient land use is when, or parsimonious in another wording, is when you manage to have a high density of functions, but also mixing them. The most residential density we have in Geneva, around Rue d'Orsay. Down here we have already Carouge, the neighboring city. And Rue d'Orsay has 20,000 residents and 10,000 jobs, ratio 2 to 1. So in that sense, it's doubling the minimum requirements and having also the ratio at the ideal 2 to 1. So it's, as we can see here, close to the river. Does have cars parking, but it does have bike lanes, it has pedestrian walking. And when we look at just across the river, we have Carouge here, the center, and you might think that this is nowhere near as dense to be a 10-minute neighborhood, but it is, because behind the historic center you have high rises and a compact settlement structure of blocks, urban blocks. And you can see that we have here now 11,000 or 12,000 residents and 8,000 jobs. So actually slightly too many jobs to have the ratio 2 to 1. But the most crucial number is to have at least 10,000 residents, because this ensures that the daily needs in shops along the main street of Carouge. You have a number of bakeries and butchers that are sustained by those people living and working, but also, of course, people traveling there because there's also a good train station, tramway. So on the left-hand side, we have 10-minute neighborhoods. On the right-hand side, we have a sprawling typology of 2,500 and less people within the 500-meter radius. And we can see that the share of trips that are made can be doubled if it's a 10-minute hood in comparison to a sprawling neighborhood. So people automatically walk more when things are nearer. As mentioned before, if you can reach things within 10 minutes by walk, you will be doing it. On the other side, you can see that it's a very strong instrument, basically, to change settlement structure to then have people driving less. You can reduction the stages by car by 2/3, so only 15% in a 10-minute neighborhood are using the car, or 15% of the stages are made by car, whereas in a sprawling neighborhood, every other stage is made by car out of convenience. Because things are far, public transport maybe is not as good, and bike might not be as safe. Now we see Flaville. I've shown you before in the introduction. The center, here's the train station, here's the main shopping street, and the mayor fears that the stores might die out, and therefore is looking into how to densify near the center of the village. Right now it has 3,600 residents and 1,500 jobs within this 500-meter radius I've shown before. Again, almost a ratio of 2 to 1. And we can see it has like 4, 3, 2-story buildings, has banks, has telecom. For the size of the village, actually very high level of retail in the main street. But when we compare Flaville with, for instance, the Linnenplatz in Zurich, which is a 10-minute neighborhood, both of them have around 10,000 residents and 5,000 jobs. We can see that the village of Flaville, the red line you can see is the boundary of the village. Red backdrop is public transport, but every 20 minutes and less. Yellow is around every 12 minutes that a bus or a train might come. But we also have a huge part that has no public transportation within a 500-meter radius. So the area that's being used to settle those 10,000 residents compared to Linnenplatz in Zurich, where you have the same number within the 500-meter radius, it shows that the land use in 10-minute neighborhood Linnenplatz is 16 times more efficient than it is in a sprawled village like Flaville. But efficiency is not all. When we look at the downtown of Geneva, it shows that we have 32,000 jobs and only 6,000 or 7,000 residents, a ratio of nearly 5 jobs to 1. So people have to travel there to commute there, but it's more extreme in the city of Zurich. Here's the main station, and I'm showing you Schützengasse because that's where the pop-up of my walking tour is currently hosting. We have a ratio of 20 to 1, so more than 10 times the other way around that it should be to be balanced. We can see here we have more stories than we saw in Flaville. So that's, again, it's not high rises that are needed to reach this number of residents and jobs. But it's not always been like that the city of Zurich has been having that many jobs. In 1962, the ratio was still 2 to 1, 400,000 residents and 200,000 jobs, but it has nearly doubled in the last 60 years. Meanwhile, the number of residents is more or less the same. It has just yeah, I think in 2022, again, reached the number that it had in 2020. So there's a video that we did in the science communication project that I'll be showing you after. But this was used by the Swiss national TV to show that how things have changed. In 1960, the ratio was more or less 2 to 1, even in the big cities, and now it's 1 to 1. And in the rural, then there's an overhang of residents, and this leads to not only using the public transportation to go to work, but also the car to get to other destinations because they're too far to walk. So, but also the city of Zurich does have a 10-minute neighborhood, actually more than one, but I'm showing you, you've already showed you the Lindenplatz, but the most densely populated neighborhood is Idaplatz with 15,000 residents. So we have less residents and jobs than we had in Rue d'Ancy in Geneva, 15,000 residents, 7,000 jobs, a ratio 2 to 1 again. And it's a neighborhood that is in very, very high demand for people to live, but also to work. Here you can see me holding one of the public tours at ETH that I gave last year, walking people around in this neighborhood and showing them around. People who can live in a 10-minute neighborhood, you can say, are very rare. It's only 5% at the moment. But if we were to manage, Switzerland currently has 9 million residents, and well, it hangs in the room because in the last 10 years we've grown from 8 million to 9 million. So it might happen that in 10 years we are 10 million people living in Switzerland. And if we had the planning right, then we could not only increase the share by 6 times of people living in a 10-minute neighborhood, in a neighborhood that has more than 10,000 residents in a 500-meter radius, but we could also on the side to reduce the car stages taken by car by half. And why do I know that? Because I made projections in my PhD, and what I'm showing you here is a small sample of the city, of the cantons of Basel, Stadt, City, and Landschaft, the bigger part. And as you can see now, you have like 3 locations in the city of Basel that does have a 10-minute neighborhood. But in the projections show that there's much more potential that at least should be checked when planning is revised, whether it could really be also implemented. And it would also have potential in the Landschaft part of the Baselland, where there's none right now. Yeah, I mean, science needs communication if people should get aware of it. I did my first conference in 2018, 2 years after I started my PhD. It was on basically 10-minute neighborhoods in Ottawa. I finished my PhD in 2020, but because the topic was Switzerland, I also found a publisher to publish it in German, a book that came out in 2024. It took 4 years from the state it was in English and as a PhD to become a nice book to look at. But then again, a book on a shelf, is also nice to have, but is not getting that much attention because as people are like convenience for mobility, it's also to read the book takes time. And here I had the opportunity last year, almost a year ago, to give it to Bundesrat Rösti at the conference where I was having a keynote. To get the words out, you have, in my case as a researcher, to take stage and present here in Aarau, to go on podiums and discuss with different stakeholders about how things could change. Politicians, builders, but also market researchers. Yeah, and then eventually you come in the news with all the good and the bad about the news. Actually, this is one of those two more charming headlines. Sometimes they don't turn out the way you expected, but it becomes part of your work to deal with the challenge of talking to the media, but also have the opportunity to show your work. One window we created with this science communication project I've mentioned before already is again funded by Swiss National Foundation, was this website which is kind of one of the gates where you could enter to know more, or also at the exhibition QR codes where you can scan and get to the videos that we try to make for everyone, not also people that have no interaction in planning, but feel that things are not going the way they should be going. The first exhibition venue was at ETH at the main building, part of the conference that I also helped organizing with ETH Wohnforum, that was about how to get more housing in cities, where I held the keynote on the topic. And out of this came Flaville, one of the projects that I can do now with my startup. And yeah, the exhibition we bring to cities, municipalities, and they firstly just stand there and people start talking about it. And then we have these walks together, sometimes with the mayor in this case, or with someone working for the city in the planning department. And then we just walk through the city and analyze what is there and what are the problems and what could be solutions. Then also documented on the website. So this is Renault, where we had like 4 or 5 municipalities that are kind of within this walking trip, and document how things are and look. And yeah, again, a podium where I end up moderating. That was initially not planned, but and then another opportunity arose through LinkedIn, where a follower said, we have an empty ground floor space, Schützengasse 23. I've shown you before. It's right next to the main station and the Bahnhofstrasse, the biggest shopping street. They're planning a renovation, and now it's vacant, and we can go there and have a nice talks. But yeah, it's like with many things, the first mover in this case was not a city, it was a gardening center in Wälty, somewhere Canton Zürich, that an owner said, oh, I would like to show this to talk about development in my municipality. And yeah, it's still going as a project, as it was financed until end of June, and after that we bring it on with my startup. And now just recently we found the opportunity to also present it within the Schweizer Wohntage in November in Bern, so we will be in Bern. Biel will be the closest to Lausanne that we make it, and so far. And another step then was to create this startup together with Miriam, who also did her PhD in law within this science, within this project that we have. We found that we want to bring it to the reality, and we have this tool-based consulting for spatial planning real estate that we founded around 2023. The initial focus was to support municipalities and cantons and federal. They were not that welcoming, so we also went to real landowners to support them in getting better planning grounds to do their developments more sustainable in the sense of ecological, but also socially. And we're doing that currently. They're focusing on developing, optimizing, holding, buy, and selling, but they need to shift to include the planning cycle into their planning so they can influence spatial planning and apply our data on legal insights so they can co-shape zoning to have more of those 10-minute neighborhoods. And how do we do that? We use the CISPLO tool, and we do educated participation. We involve the stakeholders at first selected, but then also once we have done a couple of rounds, we do that with the general public. We're aiming for social acceptance and better implementation in the zoning when it's being revised. So we try this co-creation with local actors, data-based, where we show what impacts are of building and non-building to their municipalities. We have gained two reference projects in planning. One structure plan, which wanted to implement a housing strategy, which they didn't have so far, and to strengthen inner development and coordinate urban growth. And as I've mentioned, the municipality Flavi, we're doing the we'll be doing 4D scenario modeling and participation to then change the zoning regulations. Yeah, what would I like you to remember? That 10 minutes neighborhoods are measurable. They have a 500-meter radius. They need at least 10,000 residents and ideally 2-to-1 ratio of 5,000 shops. They should enable car-free living and parsimonious land use, always at suitable locations that already have a good public transportation. Should be 15, but anyhow, 15-minute city has a strong narrative because already many locations have it, so it's easy to claim one has it and not having to change much in terms of settlement structure. A 10-minute neighborhood, the idea is to have an actionable framework to actually also change what you have towards parsimonious land use. The Spatial Planning Act actually demands this, and we can use tools and data that is available. Switzerland monitors has yearly data on residents and shops, and also on the mobility behavior of people. One can and should apply it. Clearly, collaboration is needed between the different actors, not only real estate and planners, but also the general public. And research alone cannot be built. So that's partially why we did this spin-off startup. We're accredited by ETH and University of Basel as a spin-off. And we're trying with this applied innovation to support zoning revisions and local implementation. And maybe the main takeaway is change takes courage. There's many objections towards change. I basically say start local. And start with one 10-minute neighborhood, and then others can follow in Switzerland and beyond. Yeah, with that, I close my talk, and I'm very open to your questions.